The room was smaller than people imagine when they talk about Bruce Lee. No folding chairs lined against the walls. No elders watching with folded arms. No wife sitting in the back holding her breath. Just a square training space above a grocery store in Oakland. The wooden floor uneven in places. A single ceiling fan turning slowly, clicking every few seconds like it was counting something. It was late, past 10 p.m. Most of the students had already gone home. The man standing across from Bruce wasn't famous. He wasn't a master. He wasn't even particularly gifted. He was just strong, durable, the kind of man who didn't quit when he was tired. That night would bother Bruce Lee more than any public challenge ever could. No cameras were supposed to be there. In fact, no one outside that room was meant to remember it at all. It was supposed to be just another sparring session. Hard contact. Real pressure. The kind Bruce preferred. Bruce was 24. Lean. Fast. Already building a reputation in certain circles as someone different. Not traditional. Not obedient to form. But still unfinished. The student, if that word even fits, had been asking for weeks. Let's go full speed. Bruce usually smiled when he heard that. Full speed meant something different to him than it did to others. That night he agreed. No ceremony. No speech. Just a nod. They squared up. The other man settled into a classical stance he'd been practicing for years. Feet rooted. Guard tight. Breath steady at first. Bruce didn't mirror him. He rarely did. He moved lightly. Almost casual. Hands lower than expected. Shoulders loose. The first exchange was quick. A jab from Bruce. Fast. Sharp. It snapped the other man's head back slightly. More surprise than damage. Bruce circled. Testing. The second exchange lasted longer. The student rushed in with a combination. Sloppy, but committed. There was weight behind it. Bruce slipped the first strike cleanly. The second grazed his ribs. The third forced him to step back farther than he'd intended. That's when something shifted. Not in the room. Inside him. The man wasn't technical. He wasn't refined. But he wasn't breaking either. Bruce adjusted. Increased the pace. Straight punches in quick succession. A low kick. Another entry. He was landing. Clean shots. Efficient. Precise. And yet, 30 seconds passed. Then 40. Then a minute. The other man was breathing hard. Sweat already forming along his brow. But he was still standing. Still throwing back. Bruce felt it first in his shoulders. A heaviness. Small. Easy to ignore. He pressed harder. Closed distance. Short-range strikes. Trapping hands. Another minute. Now the student was visibly slowing. His guard dropping a fraction too low. His reactions delayed by half a beat. Bruce saw the opening. He stepped in with a straight blast. Rapid-fire punches driving the man backward across the room. The last one sent him stumbling into the wall, sliding down to one knee. Silence. Just the fan clicking above them. The student looked up, eyes unfocused for a second. Chest rising and falling like he'd sprinted uphill. He didn't quit. He forced himself back to his feet. Bruce finished it shortly after. A clean body shot that folded the man inward. A controlled strike to the shoulder that put him down again. This time he stayed there. It had taken less than 3 minutes. From the outside, it would have looked dominant. Decisive. Impressive. No one cheered. There was no one to cheer. The other students stood quietly along the wall, unsure if they'd just witnessed something inspiring or something uncomfortable. Bruce stepped back. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't smile. He didn't even look satisfied. He was breathing harder than he wanted to be. Not gasping. Not exhausted. But harder. He walked to the edge of the mat and sat down without saying anything. Someone handed the fallen student water. Another checked his lip where a small cut had formed. Bruce stared at the floorboards. 3 minutes. It echoed in his mind in a way that victory never had before. 3 minutes against someone who wasn't elite. Who wasn't trained from childhood in a classical system. Who didn't have decades of lineage behind him. 3 minutes. He replayed every exchange in his head. The moment he stepped back farther than intended. The fraction of hesitation before committing to the final sequence. The heaviness in his arms at the 2-minute mark. He wasn't thinking about the man on the floor. He was thinking about himself. After everyone left, he stayed. The fan kept clicking. He stood in front of the mirror and shadowboxed slowly. Not dramatic. Not angry. Just precise. He mimicked the second exchange. The one where he'd been forced backward. Why did I give ground there? He replayed the straight blast. Why did it take that many punches? He stopped. He leaned forward slightly, hands on knees, catching his breath again. It should have been 30 seconds. The thought didn't feel arrogant. It felt mathematical. If this had been real, truly real, if there had been a weapon involved, or multiple attackers, or concrete instead of wood beneath his feet, 3 minutes was too long. He walked into the small office in the back and opened one of his notebooks. The pages were already filled with diagrams, angles, timing notes, quotes from philosophy books squeezed into the margins. He began writing. No wasted motion. Opponents do not follow patterns. Why am I assuming they will? Conditioning insufficient. After 2 minutes, shoulders heavy. He paused. Too much classical structure in my responses. That line bothered him. He'd already begun questioning traditional forms months earlier. But this was different. This wasn't theory anymore. This was physical evidence. He had won, and still felt exposed. Over the next weeks, the change was subtle from the outside. Students noticed the sessions getting shorter, but more intense. He emphasized directness. No flourishes. No extended combinations unless necessary. End it, he would say. Don't perform. He began running farther in the mornings. Hills. Long distances that left his legs shaking. Not for appearance. For endurance under pressure. He added roadwork to his routine in a way few martial artists at the time considered essential. He filmed himself sparring and watched the footage alone at night. He noticed things no one else mentioned. A hand traveling wider than needed. A stance shift that cost half a second. Breathing patterns that spiked under sustained pressure. He didn't announce these discoveries dramatically. He just removed what didn't serve him. One evening, a student asked him why they weren't practicing a particular classical sequence anymore. Bruce didn't answer immediately. Because it doesn't end fights. The student frowned. But it's part of the system. Bruce looked at him carefully. Systems don't fight, he said quietly. People do. The sparring session no one talks about became a private standard for him. Whenever training dragged. Whenever combinations felt impressive but inefficient. Whenever he sensed his own ego enjoying dominance a little too much. He remembered the heaviness in his shoulders at 2 minutes. He remembered stepping back. That was enough. Years later, when he spoke about absorbing what is useful and discarding what is useless, people assumed it was philosophy first. It wasn't. It was experience first. It was the realization that even in victory, there are gaps. He never publicly criticized the student from that night. In fact, he thanked him privately for pushing harder than expected. The man probably never understood the impact he'd had. To him, it was just a hard sparring round. To Bruce, it was a mirror. A mirror that didn't flatter. And that was the gift. By the time the world began seeing Bruce Lee on screens, fluid, explosive, seemingly untouchable, they were witnessing the version shaped after that room. After the clicking ceiling fan. After the 3-minute fight that should have been 30 seconds. He didn't become obsessed with being unbeatable. He became obsessed with being efficient. There's a difference. Unbeatable is ego. Efficient is survival. The private fight didn't humiliate him. It didn't scar him physically. But it removed any illusion he might have carried about being finished. He was not finished. He was not fast enough. Not conditioned enough. Not direct enough. And that admission, quiet, unwitnessed, written in a notebook no one else read, was more important than any public victory. Because it meant he would never stop refining. Never settle into comfort. Never hide behind tradition or reputation. The world would later call him revolutionary. They would frame him as the man who broke classical boundaries. What they didn't see was this. A young fighter sitting alone on a wooden floor, breathing harder than he wanted to be, disappointed not in the opponent, but in the margin between good and absolute. That night, he didn't celebrate. He adjusted. And sometimes, the adjustments no one sees are the ones that change everything.